You are now listening to Testimonies with Terry.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the 7th episode of Season 2 of Testimonies with Terry. I'm your host, Terry Skaggs, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at TWTerryPod, as well as by liking the Testimonies with Terry Facebook page. On today's episode, you're going to hear the testimony of a man who has finally woken up to what God wants to do through him and his life. You'll hear how his defiance in life led him to juvenile delinquency, alcoholism, drug use, and multiple job losses. Coming to his lowest point, you'll hear how he's been seeking out God with a renewed fervor in order to be obedient to God's calling on his life. From high and wasted to sober and redeemed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ben Weeres' testimony. All right, guys, I am here with my buddy, Ben Weeres. Ben, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, Terry, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Ben, we kind of had an interesting way of starting our friendship. It was right as COVID was hitting.
Yeah.
Our church went online just like every other church in America pretty much did, and we did our life groups online, and you and your wife, Alyssa, joined that, and that was how we met.
Yeah.
And didn't even really meet in person till like 5 months after the fact or something
actually,
like that.
Yeah, virtual introduction, virtual relationship.
Yep.
But yeah, finally got to meet each other. I think I remember that day almost like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
I think we walked up to each other at church and it was like, oh, you're a real person.
Yeah.
Right.
You do exist, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
And it's been great getting to develop that friendship with you and Alyssa and your family since that time. And Ben and his agency, they're the ones that actually helped design the Testimonies with Terry logo. And so I'm forever grateful for your help with that. I'm, obviously super happy with how that turned out. And so, it's great to have you on, and I'm excited to learn more about you because, again, our friendship is relatively new-ish, and excited for the people to hear about your story as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Yeah.
So, Ben, you know how we start this off. Where did you grow up, and what was family life like for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Minneapolis, in South Minneapolis. I grew up in a family of 4 kids, including myself. Mom and dad were present. I grew up in a good home, grew up Catholic, went to Catholic grade school, high school. Definitely grew up in a home that had God involved in our life, which was great. But just like any family, our family had its fair share of challenges, family dynamics and, financial issues and, losing relatives and stuff like that. So no different than a lot of people. But generally speaking, I had a good family upbringing. I was, pretty close with my family, and so it was good.
What was that like growing up in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I really appreciate where I was raised. It was a bit different time 20, 30 years ago than it is now. But still, had the diversity and the dynamics and all that stuff that you envision in a large city. So I really appreciate that part of my youth. But actually, along with that, it's that upbringing was part of what crafted me into the young adult that I turned into, and obviously I'll go into that a little bit more here. But yeah, no, it was a good experience. And like I said, it's definitely part of my story. But as you know, I got out of Dodge and moved to Cold Spring, Minnesota a couple years ago. So I think my true heart and my calling is in rural life. But yeah, it was all part of the story, which is good.
Yeah, I know you're really into the outdoors,
Yeah.
fishing and hunting.
Yeah.
I know when we kind of get together in the summers, you like to show everyone up with your
Oh,
fishing
come on.
skills.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And
It's passion, not cockiness and confidence.
yeah,
right?
no,
right.
and we're just
Yeah.
giving you crap
I
about
know.
that.
Yeah.
But where did that love and passion for that stuff come from?
Yeah.
If you grew up right in the heart of the city.
Yeah, no, great question. It was really, I think, my dad and my grandfather that pulled me into that lifestyle. My dad, from when I was born, was a relatively avid hunter. But my grandpa was a very, very passionate fisherman. Interesting fact about my family: my great grandfather actually invented the pontoon just down the road in Richmond.
What?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, lake life, I guess, is, I don't know, if you will, in my blood, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But and that's kind of part of the story of us coming up here. But yeah, I grew up coming up to this area and going on the chain of lakes here and spending many weekends every summer, fishing and swimming and doing all the things that you do at the lake, and shooting birds with BB guns and all the fun stuff. So yeah, despite growing up in the cities, I had a lot of exposure to the outdoor recreations that maybe some people don't when they grow up in an urban setting. So I was really fortunate with that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. What was that like then, kind of leaving the city to go up here during the summers, and there's not as many people, traffic isn't an issue.
Right.
You can kind of just do whatever you want because you have the space and you have the just area to do that all.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the most fond memories I have as a child. I mean, hands down, for sure. Just, driving up, packing the station wagon up or the van that we had, with all the kids and all this stuff, and coming up here for the weekend. And like I said, it was just, you just could roam free, and it just was that free spirit kind of, not, like you said, not the congestion and the concrete jungle and all that kind of stuff. So because of where I grew up, I think it was much more impactful to be able to go have those kind of experiences. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a blessing to be able to have, a cabin to come up to and get out of the cities and stuff like that. So
yeah,
yeah,
for sure. So Ben, I know as we've been talking, your story, kind of like the meat and potatoes of your story, kind of starts in your preteen, early teenage years, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we kind of get into that? You kind of alluded to it earlier, where growing up in the cities kind of impacted and shaped you into that person at that time of your life. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, man, where to begin, right? So some of the friends that I associated with as a youth didn't have as much structure in their family as mine did, and got exposed to maybe some of the more challenging aspects of city living, with crime and drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff that, kind of are the negative aspects of those metropolitan areas. So, I definitely, like I said, I went to a Catholic school. So most people think, you're above all the riffraff, but that's not necessarily true at all. And I had a lot of friends outside of the school that I went to. So like I said, I just got exposed to some of those maybe darker sides of city living pretty early on. Had friends that parents were breaking the law and doing some shady stuff, and because of that, as a kid, when you get exposed to that, it normalizes things, right? And then I become friends with these kids and get exposed to it myself, and you get into cliques and groups, and then you find yourself engaging in some of these activities, right? So I've always had some challenges being kind of defiant and struggling with authority and kind of the obedience side of civilized life. And I think that's kind of a lot where that started, and just that feeling of breaking free and getting out and just doing my thing and being on my own. And I remember just jumping on the bike and biking all over the city with, a group of friends and stuff like that. And, when you're 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, you don't really have supervision. You tend to find yourself doing things that you probably shouldn't be, picking up spray paint cans and throwing stuff at stuff that shouldn't be thrown at, and, all sorts of stuff. So, again, that was part of my story growing up, right? And what kind of turned me into the person I was as a young adult. So that's kind of where I think my challenges as a youth started.
Yeah, I think about that time of life, and that's when, in school, we start being taught about peer pressure, whether it's, usually it's drugs and alcohol or sex or things like that. And so for you, again, you kind of grew up in, when I hear people that grow up in a Catholic, school and setting, you just kind of think about like this, squeaky clean family. Right. And like you said, that's not the case. But for you to kind of get outside of that setting and into like the streets per se, how much peer pressure did you face? Like, did it take a lot of convincing for you to get into that stuff? Or was there that part of you that was just like, hey, I want to, kind of just see what this is like, kind of like living on the edge?
Yeah, there was kind of that cool factor to some of that wrongdoing that drove me to continue down that path. There was an element of peer pressure, right? When all your friends are doing something, everybody else threw an egg at that car, so I can't wuss out, I mean, there is definitely some of that. I don't ever look back and go, hey, it was like a life or death situation that I had to do some of this stuff. So, there was definitely a part of me just making bad decisions, no doubt. But like I said, just the people you're exposed to and the environment you're in just kind of, it makes some of that feel okay and normal, right? So it was a collective of a lot of different factors, but yeah, it was just the people I was around and wanting to be cool and fit in, and that was just normal part of being a kid, right?
Yeah. So then, as you were doing that stuff, did you get in trouble either with the police or school or parents?
Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, I mean, there was times that I got suspended, or what they called, we had behavior slips in my grade school and stuff like that. Got a lot of those sent home. But 7th, 8th grade was when I really started getting my wings and branching out. And I got, caught at midnight and stuff, biking around, and cops take me home and stuff like that. That happened a few times. And I never really got in really serious trouble. I guess that's a relative term to some people, but right. I guess getting brought home by the cops might sound like that, but no. And my bless my parents, my dad and mom did what they could to put me in check and remind me that there's rules and stuff for a reason. But yeah, I wasn't. It's not like I was above the law or anything like that, and I definitely had my fair share of troubles and stuff like that, even just before high school. But like I said, that kind of set me up for, I think, almost a little bit of failure moving forward, right? And as you get older, the stakes get higher and the activities get more serious and stuff like that. So
yeah, and we've talked a lot on this podcast about how important those teenage years are in our development. And I think about during that time as you're doing these things and hanging around with those crowds, that influences how you think about yourself and just kind of the reputation that you have with people too. And so what was your reputation and what did you think of yourself?
I think that's what really set the foundation for my lack of obedience and kind of my defiance, and maybe my serious discontent for authority and stuff like that. It just kind of created this mentality in me of, I'm just going to do my thing, screw you kind of thing, just that kind of mentality. And not that it was a super conscious decision, But looking back, especially when I got into high school and stuff like that, I think about playing sports and stuff, and I always butt heads with coaches and, people that genuinely are just trying to see you become a better person and improve. And a lot of improvement comes with looking at yourself in a constructive way and saying, what are the negative aspects of me or the things that I could do better and how can I improve them? And, when a lot of people, just generally people get offended when you call out flaws, right? But for me, it was like, just didn't want to hear it, right? And at that point in my life, I was pretty self-aware, and self-aware is definitely a big theme in my life, especially now that I'm just trying to strongly instill in myself, right? Looking at yourself constructively, but just had a really hard time with that. And I think that started with those preteen years of, going out after curfew and, vandalizing stuff and doing some stealing here and there, right? And, it just was kind of that, I'm going to fight authority and that's just who I am. So that kind of that started to craft really who I was, right? And I just started to live it out. And, like I said, looking back, it's frustrating and it's eye-opening and stuff like that. When you're in it as a teen and stuff, you're not that strategic about your life, right? Often.
You're mostly just kind of doing whatever feels good, right?
Exactly. And what everybody else is doing, right? And it feels normal and right and not necessarily right by society, right? But it's just, this feels like what I should be doing. So, yeah. I think it just the lack of obedience and just that defiance, I think, is what really became that foundational element in my teenage years that drove me into deeper challenges, as I started to become an adult. And that's part of the things that I had to overcome, right? And that I'm still working through today, right?
So with all this being said, you were also in school as this was all going on. At least you were supposed to be in school.
Yeah, right.
And so what was that like?
Like I said, because my parents were so diligent about what you might call hover parents, I guess, not to talk bad about them because I love them to death, but they made sure they kept a very close eye on me. And so the skipping school and stuff like that was really, really hard because my parents were just on top of it and they knew me, right? So fortunately, I did attend school regularly, but I definitely didn't put a lot of effort into it. My mind was a million other places. But I guess speaking to kind of, progressing through school and getting into high school, again, just I think just because of my upbringing, I felt mature, right? And I seemed to mature quickly and kind of had to. And actually, I met my wife freshman year of high school, and we got into a really serious relationship. And I just said my wife. So I ended up getting married, and I've been with her since basically 14. So,
which is pretty rare nowadays, right? To not just stick with your high school sweetheart, but to marry them.
Yeah, no, I mean, you don't really see that much at all, especially now, right? But yeah, no, I mean, again, it's definitely part of my story, and I love my wife to death. I would never take it back. But, as a 14, 15, 16, 18-year-old, in the world we were living in, that was kind of different, right? And almost, I don't know if I'd say taboo, but, a lot of my friends would give me crap for that, right? And, I always felt the need to check with my wife, or, that was always kind of in the back of my head, or she was my girlfriend at the time, right? But no, again, looking back on it in a weird way, I think it kept me out of a lot of trouble that I probably would have got myself into unknowingly, but I still found ways to make it hard for her to want to stay with me. So, but yeah, like I said, met my wife in high school, had a very serious relationship with her throughout high school and college, and obviously now to this day. But yeah, I guess talking more about my high school experience and stuff like that. I guess right before high school, so I had an older brother, and he, had a similar situation growing up as me, a little different. Obviously, everybody does. But because I had an older brother, he kind of pulled me into maturity a little faster as well. And so I, got exposed to drinking and, smoking pot and stuff like that, a year or so before high school, and started to become one of these weekend habits. And, the party thing started becoming more prevalent as I got into high school. And then in high school, that's again where that kind of took off, just drinking on the weekends and, smoking pot, and started, chewing and stuff like that pretty regularly early on in high school. And so I think high school was definitely where that foundation that I kind of talked about of defiance and stuff really took off. And, you just get exposed to a lot more at that point in your life, and you just feel so much older. And so high school was an interesting time, but somehow I managed to make it through.
Yeah, it sounds like it really solidified some of those like defiant and disobedient, behaviors and thought patterns that you had. Yeah,
for sure. And and it manifested in a lot of different ways, like I said, just the drinking and drugs. And I've had a job actually pretty much full time in the summertime since I was like 13. I actually started caddying early at a country club, which is just super ironic too. Not ironic maybe, but it's just, I think, pretty funny knowing who I am and who I was and everything. I was caddying at like one of the elite country clubs in Minnesota, but made good money and whatever. But I say that because even in those seemingly kind of meaningless jobs, I worked at so many places. I worked at Brewster's Bagels and Best Buy, this place called Bachman's. I can't even count probably how many jobs I've had, but even in those situations, I was just kind of had that weird outlaw mentality, right? And I got caught up in stealing some stuff, and I actually stole a couple iPods. This is going to date me a little bit, I guess, from Best Buy, and my parents found out. My dad actually made me bring them back to Best Buy and tell my manager and fess up and stuff. Says a lot about my dad, but also says a lot about where I was at, right? And this is all in high school at this point. Had another job working at a restaurant, a pretty nice restaurant actually, and I was a wait assistant, and this was about when I was 17, I think, and I was stealing cases of beer and bottles of wine and stuff, and for the partying on the weekends and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it definitely, like you said, and like I've said, I think that defiance and that just kind of complete disobedience and just screw the world mentality kind of thing just really got solidified in me.
What do you think it was about the stealing? It sounds like it started off as, we're kind of vandalizing things and we're playing, pranks, we're, partying and drinking and smoking. And then, to go from that to stealing, like, what do you think kind of led up to that? Because in my mind, we're kind of ratcheting it up another intensity level there.
Right. Actually, I mean, the theft, I guess, started even in those preteen years and stuff with those, groups of kids I was running around with.
Oh, okay.
But that's kind of where it started, right? And it's really just that defiant and screw the world kind of mentality that was just being created in my mind that I think was the majority of it. But this is going to sound really weird, but just looking back on it, like I never really stole as out of like greed. I think a lot of it was just that living on the edge feeling a little bit.
That adrenaline rush?
Yeah, right. That primarily. And then also, I mean, like I mentioned, the iPods and stuff. The funny thing is like I would give those away to like friends, or I would sell them to somebody and use the money to like buy like Alyssa like a flip phone or, like like something cool, right? So like it was never this like really selfish, greedy intent. It was just kind of this like living on the edge and, oh, who can I give something to, right? So it was almost that like Robin Hood feeling of like, I'm doing this for you guys, I don't know, kind of weird, but
maybe your like heart or intentions were somewhat good, but also still did not
I'm
justify.
stealing. Right. Yeah. Like, this is not right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. No. And that, I guess, speaks to, again, like I said, I grew up Catholic, and God was definitely part of my life since I can forever. But what Catholicism, I think, didn't really, where it fell short for me in my faith journey, was that overt, outwardly facing life as a Christian, right? For Catholicism, it was kind of, you internalize it a lot, right? Like, you keep it to yourself, right? And you don't go to a Catholic church and see people raising their hands and hooting and hollering or saying amens to the sermon, right? And there's nothing wrong with Catholicism or anything. I mean, to each their own. And actually, my younger brother teaches at a Catholic school, and he's got some great people in his community that have helped him press into his faith. So I don't talk bad about it, being Catholic, but for me, I think that's where it fell short. And I say that because, like I said, God was definitely there in my life, and I heard the whispers in my preteen years and my teen years. And I've told you this story before, but later in high school, when I was working one summer for a moving company, I decided one night on like a Thursday night that I was just going to get drunk by myself in my parents' basement. Ended up drinking a bunch just by myself one night. And then the next morning I had to get up at 6 a.m. to get to go to work and be at this moving company. And they got going early or whatever, and woke up at 5 minutes to 7 when I had to be at work at 7. And it's maybe a 15-minute drive or something like that. So I get up and I'm throwing my stuff on, racing there, and ended up, I don't know if I fell asleep or just the hungoverness or whatever it was, but ended up blowing a stop sign and getting T-boned by another car and flipped my car. And I just remember waking up with my car on its side, on the driver's side. My face was against the window. Basically, the window was between me and the pavement, which wasn't broken, weirdly. And I wasn't buckled. The car I had didn't even have working seatbelts. Basically crawled out of that without a scratch, know, and, cops showed up and all this stuff. And the cop that showed up was actually a kid I played hockey with, dad. And he shows up and he's just kind of asking me about my parents and my family, and didn't even seem to care about the situation. And he literally just let me walk home, and I walked 5 miles home after basically averting death,
Right.
And so there's just a lot of these moments, looking back, that I'm like, wow, God, you were trying to wake me up, right? It was, how much more can you be shaken and, be given signs to maybe think about your life a little bit? But I just walk home and, on to the next day.
Yeah.
I think I even had my mom bring me to work, and yeah. So, I mean, like I said, God was always present, and he is, I say that with unequivocally, he's always walking with you, right? He's here right now. He's always with you, no matter how much you think you're in the dumps, or how much in a rut you are with your crutch or your idols, or the struggles you have. God is right there, and he's trying to speak to you. Right. And it's just a matter if you pay attention or listen. Right.
Amen.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think, again, that just kind of sums up just the disaster of teenage years that I was going through, and just kept pressing on, and, just, I like I said, wake up. I read this book, The Book of Waking Up. It's by Seth Haynes. And that's where I get this term, wake up. I really love that book. Actually, I think it might be the first, one of maybe 3 or 4 books that I've read cover to cover. But until that point, even in school and stuff, I never finished books and stuff. I do my book reports with Spark Notes, or
good old Spark Notes.
Or, you read the back of the book and get that synopsis, and, you make some inferences and you throw something together, right?
Kind of pull it out of your butt. And there we go.
Yeah, that sums up my my effort in school pretty well. But anyway, so I use that term waking up because that book kind of frames it up that way. But it's essentially, God's here, God's in your life, He's got a plan for you, right? And more often than not, almost all the time, we're our own roadblock, right? It's like, get out of your own way and become self-aware, like realize that most of the challenges you face in life are your own fault, right? And there's a lot of things that happen that you can't control, right? If a meteor hits the earth, it's like, that wasn't your fault, right? But at the end of the day, I'm getting ahead of myself a little, but, as I got into the workforce after college and stuff, I'm always looking at my friends like, oh, why are they getting a raise? Or why do they have a great boss? And why is mine so terrible? And why can't I get a raise? And looking back, it's like, yeah, you could have got lucky and had a better boss or a better situation. But in all honesty, most people that have any success, it comes through just grit and hard work and and determination and, that self-awareness of, I just can't let this all influence me, right? I just got to be the best me and just let the cards fall where they lay, right?
Yeah, let's back up a little bit. High school, we talked about, like you said, kind of the disaster that was for you. And then
disaster that was Ben Weeres in high school. Yeah.
And then your car accident that, should have woken you up, but it didn't. Yeah. And so now you're out of high school and we're supposed to go off to college and really find out who we are and contribute to society. What was that like for you?
I found out definitely who I was, and I solidified it in college in a negative way. Just looking back, so blessed to go to good schools and to make it through graduating high school and college, despite my lack of effort and everything. But so I ended up getting into the U of M, which is a really difficult school to get into. Yeah, generally speaking, but graduated high school with that whopping, like 2.7, I think was maybe I think I'm rounding up. But again, just like by the grace of God, got into the U of M, like should never have happened, right? And but was fortunate too, and so went and got a good education there. But again, my focus was not on school. It was, that's where the partying and the drinking and the drugs and stuff like that really took off for me.
And before we get into that, what were you majoring in, or what were you going to school for?
Yeah. So I went into college a little uncertain, like I'm sure a lot of people do. My dad is a electrical engineer, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I'm a very right-brained kind of person in that sense. So that was kind of my initial pursuit, was thinking about doing something engineering related. But my grades didn't allow me right away to get into the engineering school. So I was in like the general college. I think that sums up who I was as a youth, general college guy. But so that was kind of my intent. And then it transitioned. I think I went into construction management because, long and the short, my wife's father is he owns a concrete and masonry company, so I did some of that in high school in the summers and stuff. So kind of like the construction world, and thought that was a good route. Did that for about a year, realized it wasn't really for me, and then ended up getting into marketing and business, which I graduated with a marketing degree, and now that's what I did as a professional since then. So that's what I ended up going to school for. But like any lost youth, it took me a while to figure it out. So yeah, I guess as I was pursuing my degree in a variety of different things, but inevitably marketing, my commitment level to school from high school transitioned to college, and just really never put the effort into it that I should have. I am definitely a proponent of the C's get degrees kind of mentality, or D's even in college, actually. But yeah, that, like I said, the partying and the drinking and the smoking and chewing, and that all escalated quickly in college. It went from thirsty Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe have, some drinks on a Sunday, to there's a reason for it every day, right? So by the end of my time in college, drinking and smoking pot was a large part of almost daily activity for me. And once you kind of hit that point, in my experience, it's pretty hard it can be an uphill battle to feel like you got to pull that out of your life, because it starts to become who you are, right? And it's part of just normal life.
Would you have said at that time you would have considered yourself an addict or an alcoholic?
Yeah, I absolutely would. Looking back on my life, I think I have addictive tendencies, just kind of in my nature. And, not to make meeting my wife and loving my wife from high school on an addiction, but I think even that is kind of an indicator that I was just, once I got a hold of something, it was really hard for me to let go, right? And especially if there was any kind of that good feeling that came along with it. And, when I really look back on all of it, I think I was just trying to bury a lot of internal struggles, with the substances and all those things that just give you that kind of immediate feel good. This kind of goes back to my youth a little bit, and just that, maybe that sense of thinking I was always good enough, but never proving it. And that kind of turned into a lot of the root of my issues was, I was always told I was talented. I always did real well in sports. And like I said, I basically graduated high school and a good college without even trying. And that's not to brag by any means. That's like a sad reality almost. But I think it just sums up that, I had the ability, but I just never applied it, right? And what I didn't realize is subconsciously that became a big struggle for me, was being confident in who I was and my ability, but never having a situation where I really proved it, right? So it was always like, well, are you enough? Are you really that good? Are you smart? It's like, I think so. I'm pretty sure, but well, show me the evidence. Well, there is none. It's like, I don't know.
It's like you can never validate yourself for maybe what you knew to be true about yourself, or what other people were speaking into you and encouraging you and championing you with. Right. You just couldn't validate that for yourself.
No, absolutely. And a lot of that came from my mom and dad. So there's kind of that bias that comes along with that you're like, okay, Mom, I know I'm great. I know I'm so smart, right? It's like, you're my mom. You have to say that, right? So, but it wasn't just that, right? It was teachers and coaches. And looking back, how many times I was sat down by a teacher or a coach or whoever, and it's like, put some effort into it. Like you're like, we see you as a leader here, but you're just not. You're not applying yourself. And it's, and that defiant me just kind of goes, well, screw you, coach. Like you can't tell me, like, if you don't respect me, I'm not going to respect, it was that spiral of that defiant mentality that just kept me down there. Right.
And like you said earlier, you didn't know how to take constructive criticism
at all. And I think a lot of people, generally, I think people struggle with hearing criticisms. Right.
Right.
But for me, it was really hard, and not in the sense that like I thought it was true about myself. It was like almost, I know this isn't true, so I'm going to be angry about it and lash out about it, right? Instead of prove it wrong. You know what I'm saying? And again, it just all these nuances just started to form who I was as a young adult, and you really just overlook it until you become fully aware, until you wake up. Right. And there is a turn to the story here. Right. I'm not that man anymore, but that definitely sums up, I think, where I was as a teenager, as a young adult. Right. And even as a in my early adulthood and, post college and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, and kind of going back to the Jesus part of your story here. You grew up Catholic, and now you go off to college, and I think most people know that, especially in today's day and age, a lot of people that grow up in the church, when they go off to college, it can be pretty easy for them to walk away from their faith or let the world influence them away from the faith. And so for you, you mentioned earlier, God, here and there, you'd hear that still soft voice and everything. So where were you at with God during that time?
Yeah. Obviously in high school, I went to a Catholic school. So, we were regular attending church. I was still living at home. My parents were, regular church attendees. I would say in college is really where my faith started to evolve. My she grew up Catholic school, Catholic high school. Her parents were Catholic, went to Catholic church and all that stuff. But in college, her parents started going to an E-free church, like a more spirit-filled church, if you will. And so I started getting exposed to that. We would go, here and there on the weekends when we'd come home from school and stuff. And I think that's when my faith journey, I think that was the fork in the road for me a little bit with my faith journey, was it started to bring God more into my life and make me realize that a relationship with God is more about church on Sunday. It's a daily, all day, every day kind of thing, right? And it's not just you internalizing it, it's how you interact with people and the way you project yourself into the world and all that stuff. So like I said, that's when I started getting exposed to different church experiences. And then when my wife and I graduated college, I got a great job coming out of college. I ended up buying our first house at 23. So, really early on, was so blessed to be able to do that. Just a proud moment for me too, that just kind of proved to myself, like, I do have what it takes, but realizing that now looking back, it's like, those are just meaningless attributes kind of, but no, so I was fortunate to do that. And as I started getting into adult life with my wife, we started to have to find a church. And so we were seeking out different types of churches. Like I said, we were going to an E-free church for a while, and then we transitioned into the AG church a little later on. But God started coming into my life more late in college and shortly after college.
What helped you to kind of start letting God in? I think about what you said earlier is that you would always defy authority figures and, screw the world type of mentality. And God is the ultimate authority figure. So what was it about him and that relationship with him that kind of helped you to shift that thinking?
Yeah. I think it was purely, and this is where I think the change in church experience really illuminated it for me, but it was the love and forgiveness of Jesus that I started to understand at a deeper level that really started to penetrate my heart and kind of woke me up to what I was doing and the detriment that it was causing in my life. And then as you realize your life is like kind of spiraling out of control and you're going down a really bad path, you really get that feeling of there's no turning back. Like, how do I change? Like, I don't know what to do, right? And it just seems like this daunting task to stop drinking and just completely change your life, right? And start being this, I'm going to coin a term from a friend, but being a church nerd, right? Like, that's not me, right? Like, all my friends party and I'm like, that's who I am. And like, I can't, how am I going to go to the bar if I am a church nerd, right? And it's like, and that is, I am proud to be a church nerd these days.
Amen.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, at that point in my life is when my heart softened, right? And God, I think, started to penetrate it. And I realized there was an out, right? There was a way to not continue on the path that I was avalanching down. And like I said, I think when after my wife and I graduated and I bought that first house, and things slid downhill really fast then, partially because I had to go into the real world, right? And I couldn't just hide at college, and had to get jobs and wake up every day and be accountable and
deal with these authority figures instead of defy them.
Oh my gosh. And lose a job if you don't, right? There was like serious repercussions to that. And I had a mortgage to pay, and, you know, student loans out my ears and all that stuff. So, I mean, it got serious really, really quick. And I think it was shortly before we got married. But I got a DWI, and that in and of itself is just an interesting little story. But yeah, you think a situation like that, somebody walks away from and they're like, oh, this is the turning point, right? This is rock bottom. That wasn't me, right? Just like press on, right? And not that didn't really give me a shake, right? And man, you go through something like that, and for anybody that has, I'm sure they would tell you the same thing, but it's an eye-opening experience, right? I haven't really experienced many other things that make you feel small than going through something like that, because it's just like, you just feel so dumb, right? And now I'm like this criminal, right? Not that I wasn't probably for the 10 years prior to that, right? But yeah, so that was actually my second time going to jail. I forgot to mention that about college, but yeah. So I mean, you think that wakes you up, and it did, but not enough, right? And then after that, my wife and I got married. Actually, a few months after that, the drinking got really bad, actually. After that is when it was like a daily thing. Starting to do it when people weren't watching and people weren't around, and hiding it from my wife. And the smoking pot was kind of just, I'd mix the two of, if I can't drink tonight, I'm going to get high, right? Or, you know, vice versa, right? Like I just kind of, and the DWI kind of made me hold off on the drinking. So then I just picked up smoking a little bit more. And again, even though at that point my heart was softening and God was definitely doing everything he could to penetrate into me, that defiance just was like rooted, right? It was just that hard rut.
Yeah. What do you think it was at that time that caused the drinking, the smoking to get worse? Because again, looking at it from an outside perspective, you graduate college with a degree, a college that you really shouldn't have ever got into,
yeah.
But you did, and you
Right.
graduated. You said you got this pretty good gig coming out of college,
Yeah.
you know, making, I would imagine, decent money.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
buy a house, you get married to your high school sweetheart.
Right.
Like, those are like four things that like everyone kind of desires at that
Right.
time of your life. So why sabotage that with drinking and smoking?
Just the lack of fulfillment, right? And I think what it boils down to is the lack of God in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I don't have to explain that to you, right? I mean, you know, right? I mean, the only thing that brings true fulfillment and happiness and joy and peace in your life is God, right?
Amen.
You can search the world for all the flesh desire, you know, all of that stuff, and none of it's going to bring value. But that was part of the issue. Was I'm checking all these boxes, right? Like, bought a house at a super young age, right? Nobody else. All of my friends graduated from good schools, had good jobs, but you know, like, that was an achievement, right? And it never gave me that fulfillment, right? And having this good job, I had a really good job at a really great company, making good enough money to buy a house at 23, right? So, but none of it was never good enough, right? It was never enough. And I started to feel that in my heart, right? And that's what I think, instead of pressing into God, because I just wasn't there yet, I picked drugs and alcohol, you know, and just tried to mask it and just hide it, right? And just, if I was half in the bag, I couldn't think about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually not true at all, which is also kind of funny, but
Well, and
not funny. But
that's something that we've talked in the past about too, is just your history of I'm just not going to allow myself to feel what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I'm going to avoid it. I'm going to mask it. I'm going to disguise it.
Right.
And I mean, I tell my clients this all the time, that never ends well.
No.
You know, God gave us emotions for a reason.
Right.
We're supposed to feel them.
Yeah.
He felt them all. And so,
Amen.
yeah.
No, and I got, obviously a couple more parts of the story here that reiterate that point. Kind of continuing on the story. So, was in our first house, was married, started to try and have kids, and, just the lifestyle I was living and kind of the lack of regard for financing or finances and all that kind of stuff just was pushing us down this bad road. Right. But anyway, so we, logical next step, already got the house, already got a great wife, right? Like, let's have a kid, let's get dogs, let's do all this, right? So we got a couple dogs, went to try to have our first kid and found out that that's not as easy as just being intimate one time, right? And, struggled for almost a year trying to get pregnant. And again, we're thinking, oh, we're healthy and, why not? What's going on, right? And I think it's hard to say exactly why, right? Because we haven't investigated it super heavily from a medical standpoint, but I think it was purely God knew I wasn't ready and I was not being obedient, and just the unhealthy nature of the substance abuse for me, I think, was the problem, or at least that's what I chalk it up to. I'm going to keep that just to motivate me moving forward. But then there's the relationship dynamic, the challenges that come along with struggling with getting pregnant, right? And you know a lot of people that have been there and done that too, right? I mean, that can crush a relationship.
Oh, yeah.
So we just grinded it out. We battled through, actually ended up kind of having this like miracle experience as we were going to church, and really, these kind of things started getting us to seek God more, right? Because it was just, like I said, I was trying to fill the void with everything I could, and just wasn't happening. And so that, just kept nudging us down that path to Christ. So again, we were slowly bringing God into our life more and making church a priority, and again, kind of moving along the story. So we ended up having to sell that first house. So I had a bunch of student loans. Alyssa had a bunch of student loans. I was making decent money, right? And Alyssa was kind of figuring out career path at that point. But basically the first house we bought was a foreclosure. It was in this 2008, 9, 10, 11, foreclosures everywhere.
Yeah, right after the crash.
Yeah. So bought like a pretty dumpy foreclosure, but ended up basically flipping the house, if you will. And we had a lot of equity in it. So because we were kind of experiencing some financial difficulties, the logical step was, well, let's just sell the house and pay off some debt and buy another house, right? And with the intent of children coming and stuff, this house didn't seem like it was enough for us, right? It never is, right? But so we ended up selling the house. Like I said, made some good money, and again, all these things that you think like just give you value and reward and fulfillment, but it just didn't, right? Because I knew I saw below the surface, right? If you looked at our life just from the outside, you're like, oh man, that
living the American dream.
100%, 2 dogs, son on the way, college educated, buying houses. It's like, yeah, that's the dream, right? But we were far from living it. But yeah, so we sold our house, ended up buying another house, which we got a good deal on and needed some work. And I wasn't afraid of that and wanted to build some equity and all this kind of stuff. And had transition jobs twice, I guess, now at this point. But again, working in corporate America and all that. But again, the drinking for me at that point, that's when it's now a daily thing, and hiding it. And again, you think life's going great for us if you look at it from the outside, but in all reality, it's the complete opposite, right? And God bless my wife, because she stayed with me and battled through it. And even though I was the anchor pulling the ship down, that's what it was. I was sinking and sinking fast. But all at the same time, our faith was growing just incrementally and slowly, and pressing into church more and stuff like that. And long and the short is, when I was working at a company at that time and had a really toxic work environment, again, just not feeling fulfilled. And I had worked in corporate America for, 5-6 years at that point, and just didn't feel like that was doing it for me. So I started thinking about that really, really heavily, and ended up just kind of on a whim quitting my job and going to work for Alyssa's dad. And that is definitely a key part of my journey, but that kind of brought a pretty big pay cut doing that, with the assumption that I'm going to help grow this business and all this stuff. And so the financial struggles got worse. And so we were living in a situation where it just was spiraling out of control. And like I said, the weird part is the more we were spiraling, the more we started to press into the church. I guess that's not weird at all.
Yeah, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. But so it was kind of this, life's getting worse, relationship with Christ is getting better. And we ended up really diving into the church and getting into some life groups. And I worked for my father-in-law for a couple of years, and we were in a really bad financial spot, like missing bills and stuff like that. And so I'm like, I gotta get back to corporate America, right? I gotta go chase some money and solve this problem. So I ended up getting a really good job again at a corporation. And right when I started that job, so I started on a Monday, and on Friday that week is when I actually had my last drink. So I stopped drinking, basically because it had gotten to a point where Alyssa had discovered my secret stashes of booze a few times. And it was very obvious that I was hammered drunk like every night, right? I mean, we had our first kid at that point, Brecken, and I'd put him to bed at 8:00 and lay down with him and basically just pass out in his bed. And Alyssa would come in and try and wake me up. And I'd just, it's like immovable, right? I'm just like purely passed out, right? And with a 2-year-old, just kind of some scary stuff when I look back on it. And again, just wake up, dude, and it's.
I was going to say, I mean, was that another moment where, you talked about the struggles to get pregnant. You have a son.
Yeah.
Was that maybe another kind of like wake up call from God saying, okay, Ben, let's
I
get
gave
this
this
going.
to you, right? Like, step up, bud. And no, it absolutely was. I mean, like I said, I think God was just proving himself in so many ways in that part of my life. Just even the fact that we got pregnant in and of itself, I think was, again, just eye-opening. But because of my history, right, I never let it sink in, right? And it was just that I'm on my own, I'm doing this on my own, that just kind of like, just that defiance and whatever just was still kind of there, right? And I don't get me wrong, I believed in the miracle. And at that point, God was like, I'm putting him first, right? And that's what actually drove me to just quit drinking. Because I don't think, I know for a fact that there's no way I could have done it actually just cold turkey without God. Like absolutely zero
Amen.
Chance, It was almost, I got to a point where you can't hide it anymore. Like I said, Alyssa it was blatantly obvious, and she ended up getting my parents involved. So the first day I started at this corporate job, the Sunday night, got hammered, right? Just day-to-day life, right? And woke up the next day, and Alyssa we've talked about it a few times, just like how scary it was to see me going to work, when you're thinking you got this great new job, so excited, jumping in, and I wake up and I'm just a pile of trash, right? And putting lipstick on a pig to get to this job. And so she brings that up not to like bring shame into my life and make me feel bad, but just as a reminder, like just how fake and how empty that life was. Anyway, so come that Friday, Alyssa had got my parents involved, and they were living up here in Cold Spring, and they came down to spend the weekend with us and keep an eye on me, and basically kind of an intervention, if you will. But at that point I was just ready. I just knew, so much was just crumbling, and life was just, it was like I was running against a brick wall every day, and it was like, I can't do this anymore, right? So my heart was there, and God was there, and it was hard, like I said. I mean, all my friends, everything about my life, my even, family and stuff like that. Life is just about kind of just drinking, right? Like family get-togethers and friend get-togethers, and there's always beer and booze, and, that's just part of life. So it was just so hard to be like, what's life going to be like? How can I be me without it?
Yeah.
But that's where God comes in, right?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, like you said, without him, you could have never quit cold turkey like you did. But
No.
beyond that, did you get any other type of help?
Yeah. Yeah. So I, at that point, my family encouraged me to go seek help. So I actually went and met with, I don't even know what you would call it, but basically somebody to assess whether you need treatment or not.
Oh, yeah. An alcohol and drug counselor.
Yeah, basically. So I met with this individual a couple times, and this was, I think, part of what allowed me to continue to quit cold turkey, if you will, was just the amount of shame that I saw coming along with treatment, and the fear of stepping out of my life and having to do that. And there is nothing wrong with that. And God bless the people that are in that space, because everybody's different, right? And a lot of people need that. But that was almost a motivator for me to figure it out on my own. So I did go to some counseling and things like that, and decided not to admit myself to treatment. But my wife was holding me heavily accountable, right? So I did end up participating in a number of like AA meetings, and got involved in that through the church we were going to at the time. They had like a freedom group, things like that. So I was getting involved in a lot of, overcoming substance type activities. And then separate to that, my wife and I were going to marital counseling, if you will, which was beneficial. Absolutely. But yeah, so I was definitely pursuing things that helped catalyze that change from, alcoholism to sobriety. But yeah, so getting back to kind of the broader story, I'd started this new job, quit drinking, and I was still chewing. And actually, when I quit drinking, in full disclosure, I was still kind of smoking pot a little bit. And I think that also helped with the transition, which sounds terrible, but it kind of gave me something a little bit to fall back on. And for me, it seemed like I felt like I could still dabble in that and progress away from the substance issues. But as I became more self-aware and woke up to myself, I realized you're trading an apple for an orange here, right? I mean, it's all the same thing. So over the course of this 9-month period, when I started this new job and I had quit drinking, I did quit smoking. Again, it was kind of just this cold turkey. And when I was at this new job, I remember this one time like it was yesterday. It was spring, summer, fall, when I had started this job, and I'd go at lunchtime, I'd drive my truck to this kind of nature spot real close to the corporate office that I was at. And I'd just have lunch, and, I'd pray and reflect and walk this path along the Minnesota River and stuff like that. And sometimes I'd dabble in a little things I shouldn't be doing. But I remember vividly at one point sitting there with like a jar of marijuana, and God was audibly speaking to me, and all I could hear was throw it, just get rid of it, just right now. And then I had a visual in my mind of standing up and God kicking the back of my knees out and me falling to my knees. And I just didn't want to do it, I just couldn't let go. And I didn't throw it. But the days after that are when I really woke up to it. And I was like, it's got to stop, right? And I felt so good about getting drinking out of my life, but it completely negated it by continuing to smoke, right? And to use other substances. So it was this weird conundrum of feeling great about it, but at the same time, I knew, because I was the only one that knew, I'm a fraud, right? Like this, I'm not, everybody's like, oh, you're doing great, stay sober. And the whole time I'm like, I'm not sober, like, but ever since I had that vision, I still have it today of just the knees coming out and getting on my knees. And it's just such a powerful feeling. And it's like, it's that whole, wake up, God's here. And he's like, he has so much for you. If you just let go of yourself.
Yeah.
You just give up, just stop trying to do it on your own.
Man, it goes to show the grip that, basically sin can have on someone's life, right? Whatever you want to call it, addiction, bondage, it's sin. Yeah. And, to have a visual and to hear God's voice like that and to still like have to wrestle with like, should I or should I not? I mean, It just goes to show how powerful this garbage is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And that same mentality, because I have that perspective, and actually this book, the Book of Waking Up, kind of talks a lot about this, of the idolization of things in your life, right? And this Book of Waking Up is kind of about, it's primarily about addiction and overcoming addiction. But what it really, I think, illuminated in my mind and why it was so powerful for me was it talks about the breadth of quote unquote addiction. And what I like to attribute it more to now that I'm deep in God's word is that idolization, right? And God talks about idols and not having idols. And, the first commandment is love your God and no other gods and all that kind of stuff. And what that book, I think, the power that book had for me was it made me realize that if you're leveraging anything above God to bring meaning and value and relief to your life, that's an idol.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just the taboo drugs and alcohol or pornography. And that's a whole nother deal too. But, it can be food or it can be exercise, right? I mean, something that's so seemingly good for you, it can start to become detrimental, right? If it's like, I wake up every day and I have to be at the gym, or, I can't live my life normal, like that's idolization right there and manifesting, right?
Can be anything.
I mean, and literally anything. These are even some more common things, right? But I mean, it can be anything. And that's what that book really made me realize is, the alcohol and the drugs, those are just like those are the taboos, right? But addiction and idolization can manifest itself. I mean, the devil uses everything he can, right? And it can even be, you can't see me air quote, but it can be good stuff. So as I'm going through this transition of going into sobriety, God is just screaming at me, and life's still kind of falling apart. So, so this good job that I got as I'm quitting all this stuff and pressing into my relationship with God and getting into church more and reading God's word daily, I'm starting to fast and pray regularly and all this stuff. I end up losing this job. I got fired. And the reason I got fired is because I was defiant and I was insubordinate, and I didn't want to hear from my boss, who I thought didn't know anything, what to do. And I just thought I had it all figured out, right? So this defiant mentality just continued to be an issue for me. And what the sobriety brought was the realization of that being a big problem for me. And there was a lot behind why I was that, right? So it took a lot of unpacking, but really what it took was waking up, right? And becoming self-aware to how much of a problem I was to my own life.
Yeah.
which, like we talked about, it's really hard to look at yourself and go, I'm the problem. Especially when I don't drink anymore. I quit smoking. I quit chewing. Like I'm just like all in for Christ, right? And it's like you just picture life to just poof go, you can just walk into the Garden of Eden and life is just beautiful, right? Not the case. And this is 3 years ago, and every day I wake up, I still got to commit to it, right? And it's still temptation follows me around, right? So the surrender is a daily thing. And yeah, actually I have this, my mom actually a couple years ago during Lent gave me this little daily prayer book. She gave a bunch of them to all of my siblings and my wife and stuff. And there was one page that had this scripture from Luke. That's Luke 9:23 and 24. And it basically is, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. And I still have that piece of paper. I was using it as a Bible placeholder, but it's now in a book that I'm reading. But you can never remind yourself of that too much, right?
Amen.
Every single day, no matter who you are, no matter how far on your journey you are, no matter you gave your life to Christ 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, sobriety for 30 years, but you can wake up every single day and that devil is going to find a way and wait for that perfect opportunity to jump in, right? And you got to renew that commitment every day, right? So kind of getting back, I'm trying to get to the end of the story here. So getting back to it, so I lost that job, so I got fired. And at that point, we were still having some really hard financial times, and that 9 months of that job didn't solve that. And so we ended up having to sell our house again because we were just in a really bad spot, and we were, like I said, missing mortgage payments and stuff, and it was really hard. And then to lose a job, I mean, it's like the world is ending, right? And actually, a very important point I forgot to make was we had a second child. Basically, I lost my job in November of 19. In September of 19, we had our second child, which again was an almost a year-long deal. Similar struggles to the first child. December of 2018, we went to a service at our church, and it talked about miracles and stuff like that, and how you got to ask for them, right? And God wants to do them if that's His will, and but you got to ask, right? And you got to be obedient. And it's funny, coming out of that service, I think within a day or two, my wife found out she was pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah. So just crazy stuff. Not crazy when you know God, but I say that because at this time that our life is falling apart financially. We've got 2 kids, both under, a couple of years old, and just the time in your life when you need some kind of stability, things are still hitting the fan. And looking back, it's interesting, but at the time I'm like, why, God? I'm sober now. Like, I quit drinking. I quit the smoking. Like, what? I'm doing it. I'm going to church. I'm pressing in. I'm praying. I'm reading the Bible, and all this stuff is still happening. And it's like, looking back, I'm like, yeah, God's like, He's still going to wake up, dude, and it's like, I am so proud of you, and I'm right here with you, but you got a long way to go, and it's just interesting looking back on it. But so we ended up having to sell our house, and we moved into my wife's grandpa's basement. He's got he's passed away now, but had a townhome, a rather small living space, right? Him and Alyssa's grandpa and Alyssa's uncle lived together in this townhome, and they had a dog, and we had 2 dogs, 2 kids, and so they had an unfinished basement in this townhome, and we didn't have the money to go rent or whatever. And so I didn't have a job. So I ended up finishing this basement, and we moved in down there. And honestly, oh my gosh, as important of a step as that was in the story of me, that was miserable. I mean, you talk about just degrading times for me, unemployed, just got fired. living in the basement of my wife's grandpa's townhome, and this basement is like, there's like one window, right? It's like a dungeon, right? It feels like we're moving into some prison, right? And there wasn't a bedroom down there. We got our bed and a couch and a TV all in one living space. There was a bathroom, which was great. But like, you got an infant, you got a 2-year-old, you got 2 dogs, and we're trying to live in this basement. And I mean, I'll never forget these times, but we have to go to bed at 7:30 or at least sit on the couch dead silent because the kids have to sleep and there's nowhere to go. And it's and it's the dead of winter. It's January, February time. And it's like, you can't go outside and sit on the patio, So what would be miserable times, I was at a point where I saw God's grace in that situation, through her grandpa letting us go there, being so gracious to let that happen. I mean, he was 86 years old. It's like, he doesn't want 5 people and a dog and 2 dogs moving into his house. And I mean, it was just mayhem at times. But, I was able to start seeing the good in challenge, right? And I started to realize that God brings challenge into people's lives that he can handle it and that he has the greatest purpose for, right? And I've seen it not just in my life, but in others too, And again, most people struggle to wake up to the realization of that. And what they do is they fixate on those struggles, right? And it's like, why me? Like, I'm going to church, like I'm doing all these things, I'm doing all these things right. Why is this happening? What I've come to realize is that instead of looking at that and going, why God, you go, what God, right? Like,
that's good.
What are you trying to get? What are you saying to me, right? Like, how can I be more self-aware of what you're trying to teach me here, right? Or what this step in the journey is setting me up for. And that can be really, really hard, especially when you're going through really hard times, right? Anyway, so we're living in the basement and we're thinking, I mean, everything's on the table. We're talking, where do we move out of state? How do we just, and again, I was, newly sober. And I guess I can kind of say that about that time because I had stopped smoking and drinking and chewing. So I was actually truly sober. But man, at that time, I would basically wake up, bring my kids to daycare, and my wife would go to work, and I would go to this coffee shop and basically sit there for hours. And usually I'd spend an hour or two first reading my Bible and then would look for jobs and apply for jobs and, try and figure out the next step. And so Alyssa and I got to a point where we decided, let's look outside the city. Let's move, right? Let's relocate. And my parents had moved up to Cold Spring area here to the cabin because my grandpa had passed away and they took ownership of it and sold their place in the cities and ended up moving up there. Alyssa had been up there because we had known each other for a long time and she had been up there. And so there was kind of like some comfort in this area. And it seemed like kind of maybe a natural place to migrate to, if you will. So basically we, more me than her, but I was bullheaded and just felt the call to come up this way. So I started looking for jobs up here, in St. Cloud and stuff like that. And within, I want to say, a day or two of making that decision to move this way, I came across a job, applied for it. And within 45 minutes of applying for this job, I got a phone call from HR and it's like, hey, thanks for applying. We think there's some potential here, could you come in for an interview? And it's like, first of all, that in and of itself is, I don't know, for anybody that's applied for jobs, I mean, usually you don't get calls back anytime soon.
Right.
And if you do, it's quite the process, right? And actually the last job I had, I had 6 interviews. It was over the course of, 4 months and stuff. And this was, 3 weeks after I even got a call back, right? So I got this call and I'm like, this feels meant to be, right? Next day, I drive up to St. Cloud for an interview and the following morning, I got a call from the hiring manager and got offered the job. And it's just like, yeah, this feels right. Like, praise God, like, let's go. And so, me and Alyssa are talking about it, and we decide, like, yeah, let's do it, right? And so she's got a job down in the cities, and she decides to put her notice in, thinking she'd have to figure something else out. And she puts her 2-week notice in, and her boss is like, you know what, would you be interested in working from home and just keeping the job? And it's like, okay, praise God, right? Like, this doesn't happen. And this is like 2 months before COVID hit. So it wasn't like this, working from home was like it was almost taboo at that point.
Yeah.
So again, it just felt like it was just meant to be. And so we're like, all right, let's go. And we start looking for places to rent because we couldn't manage to buy a place at that point. And through our initial searches and stuff, we just found it really hard to find a good place to rent, especially with kids and dogs and stuff like that. So we were, having some fears and some doubts, like, oh boy, we might have to move in with my parents or something. And Alyssa's like, yeah, no, I'd live, under a bridge. I'd live anywhere outside of your parents. And this is coming out of the grandpa's basement, right? So
Yep.
It's like you're hyper conscious of your living situation. But weirdly, one night we're sitting in her grandpa's basement in the dark at 8:00 because the kids are in bed, and she gets a text from my sister-in-law, my brother's wife. She just knew our situation, and she must have been out looking for, just cruising the internet or whatever. So she sends my wife this text with this rental, and I can't remember if it was that night. I think that night Alyssa sent a message or whatever to the person that posted this, and they ended up texting back and forth or whatever about us being interested. And again, I was unemployed, so I drove up there next day and went to go look at it and talk to him and stuff. And he's like, and I went and looked at it, and it's a single family home, and it's like, wow, this sounds magical compared to what we're in. So, and we don't have to go into an apartment and all this stuff, and dogs are okay, and the rent was super reasonable. So we commit to it. And the weird part is this guy, usually requires you to an application process, right? And he wants to know your employment and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have this new job yet, right? And he's like, when I went and met with him, he's like, oh yeah, there's like 10 other people that I'm gonna, if you're not interested, I'm, 3 other people are lined up for later or whatever, So it's just all this like anxiety. Long and the short is like I'm talking to this guy, and I'm telling him where I got this job, and he's like, oh, I know, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, oh, it sounds like you guys got it all figured out. Like, don't worry about it. You just, we'll sign the contract, and you put the deposit down, and we'll call it a day. Right. So it's just like, okay, praise God. Right. Like, what? Okay. So, 3 weeks after that, we end up packing up and moving up to Cold Spring, and I start my job and all this stuff, and get kids into daycare, and the daycare we got them in is just, the kids loved it and all this stuff, and just felt like so right. Then 2 months into it, I get fired from the job that I got.
Oh man.
Again, the defiance was manifesting, and and not that I was, wow, after that first firing, I'm like, it's you got to figure this out. Right. And, but I go into this job just like more excited and just ambitious than I've ever been in my life, and almost too much. And this company that I went to work for was kind of like, stay in your lane, like, don't get too many ideas here, right, kind of thing. And generally, I'm a very visionary kind of ideas and change and ambiguity and all that stuff is just, I thrive in that, right? So I go into wanting to change the world and thinking I'm bringing all this value, and weirdly, I basically went to this training event kind of thing and wasn't necessarily supposed to, and got fired shortly after that for, again, just kind of not listening. And boy, was that, doesn't get much harder than that.
Yeah.
To walk home from that. Oh my God, I was sobbing my whole way home. To go tell my wife that I got fired was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And, God was such a part of our life at that point that it's just like, all right, this sucks, but you knew we wouldn't come here unless there was some financial stability or seemingly, right? And you got us here. I'm an idiot and I probably could have avoided that, but long and the short is that it felt like I took that job just out of pure desperation, right? And I looking back, I don't think that situation was the best for me, and I don't think I'd probably be there now, even if I did still or held that job. Nonetheless, immensely challenging to go through that.
Yeah.
And just as a man and all the things. But I'm like in a great place with my walk with Christ, and I'm pressing in, and I'm like, I'm trusting you, God. And again, the financial struggles are still following us. And, it got to the point where it was like, I'm unemployed again. And, it's like, how do we pay the bills? And just weirdly, we'd get like checks in the mail from we got like a $800 check in the mail from like a back payment or something from insurance from our previous house. Just like, 5 months later, just randomly,
God's provision.
Yeah. It's just like, again, I say just crazy, but not at all, not knowing
it's
God.
Normal to God.
No, exactly. And he's like, yep, right here, right now. And no, one more week. Yep. Right here, right now.
There it is.
Yep. It's like, man, but just, I get chills still thinking about those things. Cause it's like, just when you think it's over, it's not,
Mm-hmm.
Here's
never over with God.
No, here's a little shot in the arm, and again, all this time I'm like, it's this theme of waking up. Right. And I'm just like, I'm starting to look at these situations with just this sober mind and just this this lens of God. And it's like the old me would be just in destruction mode, but the new me, it's like, yeah, this is not how I would picture it to go. But when I pictured it to go a certain way and it was going a certain way in my life, it went downhill quick. So I'm going to kind of just put my thoughts on how life needs to go aside here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And that's, I think, again, just kind of the attentiveness to God and that waking up and that realization, that daily wake up every day and lay your cross down or lay it down at the cross and just commit your life to God. It's got to be every day, because even when you think things are going good, you lose a job and God's right there just waiting, yep. I know this might sound really crazy and this is all not how you think it needs to be, but it is. But again, getting back to the story. So I was still feeling pressure from my wife and my parents and stuff to pursue a professional career. It's like, you got a college degree. That's why you went to college. Just get back on the horse. This is terrible, but just apply for it. Just get out there. You just did this. It sucks, but go get another job, So I did. And kind of at during these times, I'm thinking about everything, right? The meaning of life, what I want in life, what's my calling, what do I do? Is corporate America not where I'm supposed to be? It sure feels like it. I just got fired twice in like 6 months. So, everything's off the table. But again, just kind of the pressures financially and all that just pushed me down to apply for another job. So applying for jobs, ended up getting a call about a job in St. Cloud, another, pretty good job. Ended up taking the job and again, went into it just with a renewed spirit, just ambition and, just a different mentality. I was at that job for about 3 months and got fired, which, again, it was like almost at that point, it's like, I'm just looking up going, can you just help me understand where to go from here? Because again, I didn't really care about losing the job and anything like that, because I was just, my armor was on and I was resilient at that point. But the drive home from that to go tell my wife I lost another job, there is absolutely nothing more degrading than that.
Yeah.
The sad reality of being a man and the kind of the culture of it, wanting to be the breadwinner and make all this money and, be this thing you think you need to be. Like, so all of that just that drive home to go tell my wife I got fired again was like, Actually, I didn't drive home. I ended up driving to this spot here out in the country and just parked my truck. And I'm like literally on my knees, just waiting for some kind of insight into why, not the why did you do this, but like, I can't handle this anymore. I thought I learned all the things I needed to learn here. Do I really need to continue to do this? And, a year, 2 years, I guess, now after the fact, I look back and I go, no, you haven't learned anything, right? Like, you're only a year past this sobriety thing, and I still have so far to go. You as you hear my story, there's so many milestones and monumental events that have occurred and so many wins that I feel like I've had. But again, looking back, I haven't won anything, right? And the journey is a lifelong thing. And it's hard to see through the tree in the forest or the forest through the tree. Well, I don't know what that saying is, but I don't either. Yeah. But when you're in it, when you're in that when you're living in day-to-day life, it's oftentimes hard to look back and strategically look at your life and go, why are these things happening and whatever. But, I'm sitting in this, at this piece of public land, looking out on the landscape and just diving in and just pressing in and just asking God for vision and all this stuff, and end up going home and telling my wife about what happened. And I mean, bless her soul, she, it almost didn't even faze her, not that you get numb to that stuff, but I think just where we were at in our faith journey, it was just kind of like, yeah, I guess not surprising, just another step in the journey, right? Which it certainly was. And that was at a point. So I was at a point then that you really start looking outside the box. So, corporate America didn't feel like the right fit. And I did too, forget to mention that when we moved up here, we ended up getting involved in River of Life, and that's where you and I met and stuff. And boy, have we met just some amazing people and families and created some great friendships and stuff through River of Life now, and just brought Christ-centered people into our lives. And so, when you start to do that and you start to bring God in and put God first and bring everything in your life just to kind of revolve around that, you can take these punches and turn the other cheek, right?
Yeah, the power of community.
Yeah. And it's like, what's next, right? Like, that wasn't that hard, right? Like, devil, you can't hit me. Like, that's all you got, dude? It's like, God is with me. But yeah, so we're pressing in and I'm looking at everything, and I started to pursue a business that I had for many years had kind of laid on my heart to do. And I actually tried doing it a little bit early on after college, but it fizzled out or whatever. And so I started a business. I'm just kind of working with people around here and doing odd jobs, if you will, just trying to make, ends meet basically and pay the bills. And I joined the fire department, which was primarily to help me focus on living a selfless life, right? And just giving back and, leveraging the abilities and stuff that God gave me to do good. And so, life was just changing so much that, not that life isn't still challenging with God in it, but it's you understand that there's meaning in the challenge, and you're much better equipped to deal with it when God's at the middle of it. So yeah, and got into life groups. That's how we met. Have led a couple life groups, have been in a bunch of life groups. So just built this community around us, and it's just been unreal to see where God's taking our lives and what he's doing in our lives, despite everything that I've done in the past. And, it's just like, especially when I look back at the time when, right before I quit drinking and stuff, it's just to think about 3 years from then was almost impossible, right? It's like, I don't know how I'm going to be a different person, because I can't be. But now I'm like, yeah, God, yeah, like, praise God, that's what you need, right? Yeah. That's the catalyst. and that's what was missing. And but yeah, we've had a third child now, and that was not an easy one either. But God's got a plan, and we've since actually taken ownership of the house we were renting. Weirdly, the guy that was renting it was trying to get out of the rental business, and he was actually going to start getting into home building. And he's working with a couple from church here to get into that. And I've since actually helped this couple with some marketing stuff. So it's been an interesting journey to find the relationships and how we're all intertwined there. But we ended up buying the house that we're in. Didn't have to put any money down. Didn't have to move, didn't have to do anything. We just kind of signed some paperwork, and again, just praise God. Like, what,
Well, yeah. And what a huge blessing, you go from having to sell a couple houses in the cities due to financial reasons, right, to living with your wife's grandpa in their basement, yeah, and now, go up here with the rental home, and now to actually sign a contract saying that we're going to take ownership of, right, this home. That's a huge blessing.
No, it is, absolutely. And again, I mean, I've realized that owning a house isn't what brings meaning to life, but it sure gives you that sense of not only accomplishment, because actually my wife, because of my self-employment status, I wasn't really able to help attribute to that the financial aspect of taking ownership of the house. So I say that because it was a miracle, not a miracle, but it was a work of God to make that happen, because my wife didn't think at all that she was enough, or that her job was enough, or that she could do that. Because basically I had bought in the two houses before that with the corporate job money and stuff like that. And again, not to discredit my wife, because she's always had a job and works hard and brings a lot of value to the table from that perspective. But it was just so amazing to watch God work in her to allow for that. But yeah, and then, as of late, I've had some health issues, some really serious ones. Apparently, I ended up, I wasn't feeling great, and ended up going to the clinic or whatever just to get checked out. And according to the woman that I saw at the clinic, my hemoglobin levels were like, you should be dead low. So I ended up getting taken into the ER and spent the weekend in the hospital and got some blood transfusions and had some surgery and stuff like that. And, again, for most people, that is just like it's a really hard thing to experience. But really, really weirdly for me, and just where I'm at and God being so present in my life, it just seemed like a little walk in the park. Like I never had any doubt that, all these nurses and doctors are like, oh, so we hear you were at, your hemoglobin was at a 4. It's like, that's like dead, right? It's like, no, I don't, but I've been told that, right? And it's like, I knew I felt crummy, but I didn't. It's still hard to believe that my life was at risk.
Yeah.
Just because I just like the whole time I knew something was wrong. Because, when you're at that point, you can kind of feel it. But after going through everything I've gone through, it was just like, I know you're not going to let me die. Like, I've got too much more to learn, and you've apparently got too much in store for me that I am still kind of unaware of. But I was like, it was almost just annoying. It's like, I got to spend 3 days in the hospital. Like, I just want to be home, like helping with the kids and all that stuff. But
yeah, it's like, I know I'm going to be fine. Just get me out of here.
Right. Yeah. And again, not to discredit it or anything, because praise God for me still being here. But, you just, gosh, you look at life unbelievably differently when Jesus isn't, and God is at the center of it, And then, yeah, I planning to get baptized here in a couple of weeks, or maybe 3 weeks. My wife's going to do it with me. And
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. And because of the fact that I grew up Catholic, right? So I was baptized at, whatever. And because I grew up in a faith-based home and have for years now really given my life to Christ, it seems like I almost like that wasn't necessarily a step I needed to hit, right? For a lot of people, baptism is like something major happened. I'm giving my life to Christ today, baptized, new life, right? And I feel like I kind of missed that train. So I always just kind of wrote it off. But a friend of mine, I guess, strongly encouraged me to pursue that. Just because, again, I'm still at a point where I don't feel like I'm fulfilling the call, and I'm very much awake and aware of how He's working in my life and the journey and all that, but I still feel like I'm in that learning transition kind of growth phase. And it's hard for somebody like me, at least, that I just want to give it my all, right? I just want to like put 100% into something and just feel fulfilled. And, and not that I don't, and I'm blessed to be in the situation I am for so many reasons, but that's kind of what drove me to this baptism thing, is like, I just want it. I'm trying to take it all off the table, right? Like, I am going to check every box that I possibly can to make that conduit from God to me, just, go from 100 megabytes to 100 gigabytes, right? Like, I just want to direct all of it, you know? And I'm trying to be self-aware of the fact that you can't just, there's value in a baptism, right? In an outward expression of, committing your life to Christ. And I kind of skipped that. So, and yeah, again, with the kind of the health stuff, it's just like, what more can I do? Where I'm at is I just try and wake up every day and pick up my Bible, get in the Word, and just ask God for His will to be done and to help me understand what that is, and just to be aware of it. And maybe don't require a car, flipping a car, or, going into the hospital to wake me up. Maybe help me realize it in a little more subtle ways. But yeah, I'm finding that subtlety is not God's plan for how I learn. That's where I'm at. And boy, is it just, God's got to be there. He is there. Let Him be there. Bring Him in, and He'll lead you to where you need to go,
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on the show for your testimony. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but yeah, you don't have maybe like kind of like the typical testimony that I've had on this show so far, where there seems to be maybe like one or maybe two big life events, and the person just kind of changed their life and have been able to go on, and those are great testimonies. Yeah. But your life has been more of a, kind of like you said, just kind of something happens here. You have an opportunity to wake up. You didn't take it. Right. You go again, didn't take it. You had a lot of those until, I mean, like you said earlier, you may not have gotten down on your knees when you felt like the Lord said that you should, but you got to that point. Oh yeah. You've got to that point since, and to see you where you're at now, I mean, yeah, this is just raw and this is real. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, that, yeah, we all go through struggles, and our testimonies aren't going to look very pretty. And it doesn't have to be just, one bad thing happens to you and then bam, God shows up and everything is good. Right. It's God works through everything. And to see how God has worked through you and Alyssa, I mean, and I think we got to give her a lot of credit too. I know you have throughout here, amen, but what a strong and amazing woman to kind of put up with a lot of the stuff that you guys have had to go through. And man, it's been so cool to see how you have grown just in the time that we've known each other, the last, 2 years, if that. Right. And so before we head out here, Ben, I'm wondering, to the people that, like we talked about, where they're just kind of like, it's just one thing after another, where they know that they've had opportunities to lay things down at the cross and to go the way of the straight and narrow, but they just haven't, or they feel like they can't. They feel like this is just too difficult. Like the things I'm doing, the things I've done, it's just who I am now. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I guess first and foremost, I'd say your calling is waiting and God is waiting. And it doesn't matter how many times you screw up or make a mistake. or defy that voice, right? He'll still be there, and he is there, right? And he has peace and grace and love just waiting to consume you. And all you got to do is just let him in. And it can be really hard and really scary to think about what feels like completely changing your life. And a lot of it is, and it's going to require that, a lot of change and hard change. But if you let God in and put him at the center, I can't even explain to you how much easier it is to make that transition and how much more amazing life is once you do. And yeah, the pain will go away. You're going to realize a lot if you continue to just commit to God every day. And like I said, it's lifelong. I mean, even me being years past a lot of, well, I'm not really past any of the challenges in life, right? I'm going through them still. But even for the people that have maybe those more rigid life transitions and challenges and testimonies, even after you give your life to Christ, struggles don't go away, right? And life can still be very hard, and the devil is still present, right? And temptation is still looming every single day. And that's why, even Jesus sat in the Garden of Gethsemane and asked God, let your will be done, right? And lead us not into temptation, right? I mean, that was something Jesus prayed multiple times. And if Jesus is asking for that, I think that's a good enough sign for us to realize you're never above it. So, and then the last thing I'd say too is just take it one day at a time. Thinking about 3 years from now can be really daunting, right? And thinking about every step that you need to take to get there, it can be really hard and really scary and overwhelming. But when you take it day by day, and especially when you're trying to overcome like an addiction and stuff like that, don't think about quitting for weeks or years or your life or changing your life. Think about, what am I going to do today to avoid the temptation? And just take it one step at a time. And all of a sudden you'll realize it's 3 weeks in, it's 8 weeks in, it's 6 months in, it's 6 years in. And I'm guilty of, falling back into those temptations. And I think everybody is, but like I said, doesn't matter how much you screw up, God's going to be right there waiting for you to come back.
Yeah,
So,
his grace and his mercy and his love is never ending.
no, which is unbelievable. And
Yeah.
we all get it.
Yep. Doesn't matter who you are.
No, not at all. Even me.
Even you.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, man. You got just a great story that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. So again, Thank you so much.
No, I appreciate you having me on. And if anything, I just hope and pray that somebody finds Christ through this. And hard to be yourself sometimes, especially when you're not proud of it. But this is a great opportunity, I think, for people to realize that there's a better life to live, and it's through God.
Amen.
Thanks for bringing it, Terry.
Amen. Not a problem. Thank you.
Yep.
So like I said, Ben's story is really unique to any other testimony I've done so far. Usually those previous testimonies have consisted of someone coming to their lowest point, finding God, and then living for him with all their might after the fact. With Ben, he's had a relationship with God for most of his life, but throughout the series of events he discussed, he let his own defiance and stubbornness get in the way of what God wanted for him until recently. Now that Ben is awake and alive to the things of God, you can hear the motivation he has to chase after the purpose on his life. And that includes owning and operating his marketing and sales agency, Weeres Collaborative. So if you're needing help with graphic design, branding, website development, market research, or anything else you need for your brand and business, check out wecollab.com. That's we with 2 E's. And I'll link it in the show notes, so get in touch with Ben and see what he can do for you. And if you have any questions for Ben, use the hashtag AskTWT and we'll get him to answer a few. That's it for this episode, and I'll be back next week with the last episode of Season 2. In the meantime, make sure to leave those 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, write a review, and share this podcast with your friends and family to get the word out about what God is doing. Also, in the meantime, make sure you're living life in such a way that glorifies God and kicks Satan's butt. Peace.